and welcome to another episode of the Athletic Development Show, proudly brought to you by Iron Edge. Super excited to have today's guest, Maddie Boyer, on the show. Welcome to the show, Maddie.
Thank you for having me, Darren.
So much to talk about. So for those of you that don't know Maddie, she is a former Core Advantage intern and coach, and she is now a physio. She's got an undergraduate degree in sports science. She is a international level skier, or was, and is a Pilates gun as well. Very good at Pilates. So there's heaps to talk about, in particular around that stuff as well, I reckon. So I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at you, Maddie, and there'll be heaps to chat about. But the other day when we were teeing this up, the thing I couldn't help remembering, because every time I think of your journey, I think of the first time I met you, which was when you arrived at Body World back in the day, with a giant halo brace around your head. So for those who don't know, that's like a piece of, that like in movies, you'll see someone in this sort of scaffolding holding their head still. So was it a broken, what did you broken skiing when you arrived for the job interview?
So I broke the base of my skull. Occipital condyle 1 is the term for where it was broken. And Amazing. It was a bit of a nasty one, so it was displaced, and that's why I had to wear the halo brace.
Yeah. How long did you have to wear it for?
That was 3 months of my life, just before I turned 21 too, so I was devastated to know that I was going to turn 21 in my halo. You know what's funny? I spoke to my mum last night when I had the conversation with you, and she goes, I still can't believe because I couldn't drive a car in my halo brace. And she goes, I still can't believe I took you to that interview. Like, I couldn't believe you wanted to go still. And I explained to her, I'm like, you don't know, sorry, you go.
I was going to say, you interviewed really well, and you probably would have been in anyway. But I have to say that Rob and I were both incredibly impressed to see you arrive. Like it was a level 11 commitment to arrive there. With that brace on, it was like, yep, she's definitely committed to the task.
Yeah, no, that was it. I think, I just didn't want to miss the opportunity. I said to Mum, like, this is the coolest thing that's happened since I went to uni. Like, I want this job. And then I just had a little mishap along the way. I didn't want to miss it.
So mishaps along the way are a thing in water skiing. Like, you guys have some serious accidents.
Yep.
How fast are you going? Because I looked at your Insta and I saw you going past it, and I was like, that was really fast. How fast are you going on the water?
So we do, as a female in the sport, we do in excess of 100 mile an hour.
100 miles?
Yes.
So what's that in K? It's like 130 or something ridiculous?
Yeah, or more. So 60 mile per hour is 100 kilometres an hour. You can do the math.
Oh, I can't do the maths. But
I'm not good at quick maths either.
That's really fast.
Yeah. But when I had my accident, I actually wasn't travelling that fast. It was out in the ocean in Geelong.
Okay.
But yeah, so 60 mile an hour was when I fell, but it was enough just the way I fell, and unfortunately, that was the result of it. Was
it one of those things where you were immediately like, holy shit, I could be in a wheelchair? Like, was it that level of... What was
Not
it like?
At all. No. I mean, like, I was fairly winded. So picture like a scorpion. I felt like my head hit the wave and the rest of me kept going over the top. And I felt like I nearly, like, how those amazing gymnasts can, like, kick their toes and touch their head in the extension. That's what I felt like was happening, but I wasn't encouraging it at all.
Oh my God.
So at the time, I just felt like incredibly winded, and I felt like I had more pain in my upper back. But the telltale sign for an occipital condyle fracture is bleeding eyes. So I had, like, googly eyes. They were really, like, swollen, and they bleed.
Wow.
And I had no idea. So it literally wasn't until I got to, so I sort of went to the local hospital, then I got shipped down to the Alfred, and then it wasn't until I got there and, the important surgeons come in and they're like, look, this is what you've done. And I was like, oh my God, this isn't really ideal. And then I was like, can I just have a neck brace? And they were like, no, that's not an option.
Yeah.
And I was okay with it until they told me they were going to shave my head. And then I was like, that's it, tears, the whole lot, it works. Yeah.
Did they shave your head?
No, so I negotiated and we got like little square holes shaved.
Right. Yeah, because I feel like I would have remembered if you had a shaved head.
No, so they sort of encourage it because they're like, I think it's for the, the infection risk of having to wash your hair, because you could only, like, I showered, it sounds gross, but I showered fortnightly. I'd actually travel to the hospital. They'd sort of let you shower and then they replace, because the brace goes quite like low down, almost to your lumbar spine. And they'd replace like the sheepskin lining that was in it, and then they retension the things in your head.
Okay, so the halo. So was there surgery? Like, did they put
No.
bolts inside, or is it just externally fix it? Or they just kind
Just
of
externally
clamp it onto
fixed,
you?
yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah.
So like it does, the pinholes do go into your head and they sort of just rest on the skull is my understanding of what happened. But yeah.
So pinholes go into your
They still,
your
yeah.
skin.
So, can you see them? They're there.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Right.
So when I see those two, that's there.
Yeah.
And then I've got two at the back. Yeah.
Right. And they just rest.
Yeah.
They're not drilled. They're not drilled in. They just
They're
rest
not like drilled in, but they sort of like, so I remember like you stay awake for the procedure too because you've got lots of nerves that they don't want to affect
Mess with,
because you
yeah.
may lose your function. Yeah. But they just sort of like, they put the brace on and then fix the 4 points and then they sort of have to like tension like each section so that it goes on like level, if that makes sense.
Amazing.
I don't know.
So-
we need an orthotist to come and tell us how it actually works. But
Yeah, it's incredible. And so you're in that for a long amount of time. And did you consider perhaps retiring from, or you're like, no,
yeah, like I went through a big, emotional, psychological, process, I guess you would call it. So at the very start, I remember coming home and my ski gear was still, because it was all in pieces and wasn't quite all intact. There was, it was sort of out in the outdoor space at home. And I just said to Mum and Dad, I'm like, can you get rid of it? I don't want to see it. Don't want to, I was pretty scarred from the original trauma of it all, I guess. And then sort of, a couple of months in and I was obviously feeling much better and it was obviously healing because I could do a lot more and not feel so unwell and all the rest of it, that I started to get bored at home. I'd finished uni by that time too. So I had to sit my last exams in my Halo brace and then I'd finish uni. Then I was like, well, now what do I do? So I started traveling to events again, just to see friends and bits and pieces. And then being, someone that's a little bit competitive, I guess I sat on the sidelines thinking like, I normally beat those girls, so can we just hurry this process up so I can get back out there? So it was a bit of a funny one. And then even getting back into the sport, like it was such a frustrating process to know that, where you were, and it's the same with any injury for any athlete, where you were before is definitely not where you kick back off again. And then, I mean, the psychological demons that I had to sort of process and get through, like I definitely skied as a different person. And with skiing, you sort of got to be really confident that, you can ride whatever wave's coming at you. And so I would always sort of, I guess, instinctively react to get on my back foot because I fell forward. And when I do that, you actually lose more control and it gets worse, not better, if that makes sense. So I had to do a lot of work. I used a life coach and a sports psych to help me get over that, to get back to where I got to.
And you got back to being better than ever. So you were saying just off air before that you were bitterly disappointed to only come second in the world. Because that's not what you wanted to do, which I love. Did it make you, some athletes are better afterwards. Was there an element of that where having the time away from the sport and coming back to it made you better? Once you'd gotten back up to, put the time back in, were you better afterwards?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of it is realizing that you're not invincible. I thought I was. Yeah. So I used to, and I think I was young then too. So my mentality was very different. I didn't realize what the risk was when it does go wrong. So I was at that time in life where I was probably less involved in sort of the training side of the sport, wasn't really looking after myself, and then because of that, I was turning up unprepared and relying just on my skill itself, and it wasn't enough. And especially in an endurance type event, which is when it happened, when I had the injury. And so I think from that point on, I sort of just made a promise to myself that I'd never put myself in a position to go out in an event and go, will my fitness levels and my current preparation enable me to, will I get through the race, let alone will I excel in the race, if you know what I mean? So I just made sure I was, definitely prepared from then. And then I guess a lot of the sports psychology stuff I had never really done in the sport. And I only did it for the fact that I knew that it was a mental barrier that was holding me back. So I would always get to a position in a race and I would be, head to head, I'd get out in front and I'd be fine. But if anyone challenged me, it'd be like full body fatigue, couldn't even
Really?
So I actually had my dad come on to observe and look after me after I had my accident. Nothing, I just felt more comfortable with Dad and he never really wanted to do it, but I had to beg and plead for him to sit in the boat. And so the observer sort of watches and communicates between the driver and the skier.
Yep.
So that was his role in the team. And he used to say to me, he's like, what happens? Like, you go from looking fine, great technique, all the rest of it, to just absolutely, it's like watching a 10-year-old ski again, and it was very much a mental battle.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So as a non-water skier, all I understand
Yes.
is that it looks really difficult to get going. What does it require physiologically? Where does it get tiring? How does it work?
So physiologically, and it depends on what sort of racing you're doing. So say in a river event, so they're more of like an A to, point A to point B. So say the race that runs here in Mildura, you start in town and then we race 50 Ks down the river. You often have a partner with you, but obviously on the river,
How long does
we don't
50
have a lot
Ks
of...
take?
Hey?
How long does a 50K race take?
I would say around 30 minutes. Don't quote me on this. Again, I'm not very good with my numbers. So that, I think here, our
but it's a while.
would be
it's a long
around...
race.
Yeah. So the 50K race, that's half of it, and then we turn around and we come back. So it's actually a 100K race here.
Right, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But because there's no waves, no nothing coming at us, it's very much more of an isometric sort of squat position, but we're in a tandem stance. A lot of it, I have a lot of trouble with more grip strength, so that's a big thing for me. So we hold two handles behind our hips. So a lot of the pull comes from the hips. It's not like your arms are literally getting torn out of the sockets at the pace that we're going. So arm strength, we've got lots of quad, isometric holding, but then you've got calves, and then the navigation of corners and cornering speed, you rely on your team a lot. So we're on 300 foot of rope behind the boat. So obviously the boat is already through the corner, but we actually haven't even started to enter the corner. So if they decide to take off because they're in the straight of the river, we just get flung out into the sticks. So that's not cool. So you've got to really be confident and have good communication skills with your team and have them know that, you can negotiate
are you mic'd
the corners.
Up or you're talking to them, or is it just...
All hand all hand signals. I mean, some of the top crews have played around with mics, and we have played around with sort of buttons on our handles that will show a red light, green light system. But again, not at my my level, and I'm pretty sure they're not they're actually banned in the sport again now. So that any of that ship to shore and being able to communicate with the team in the boat is not allowed.
It's such a foreign world to me. And I imagine that when you're at 100 kilometres an hour or above, I imagine that when you hit the water, obviously it's not going to behave the same way as concrete would in terms of friction, in terms of scratching you up like a bitumen road would. But it's going to be just as hard as concrete, isn't it? There's going to be no give at that pace, yeah? Not
at all, yeah. And I mean, again, it depends how you fall, but ideally you want to sort of skip along the water if you're falling off. No one wants to fall off at that pace. It's never going to be a good outcome. But, you'd prefer to wash off a bit of speed and skip along in the water before you actually bog in and then get thrashed around, I guess. Yeah.
You see one of the most interesting things is watching professional motorbike races, and you see those guys fall, and they're really good at falling. They come off the bike and they just get up and it's sort of 8 times out of 10 they're unscathed because they've just been really skillful at falling. Is it a similar thing there where you're just trying to just sort of, or is it, do you fall less often so that you're less skillful at it?
I touch wood, Durham, I have not fallen off since that day.
Okay.
And I just, I don't, actually that is not correct. I did fall off during the World Titles, but never at that pace and in that scenario, I guess. But potentially I have learnt to fall better because I've never had, a serious sort of injury from falling. But people have always said you need to try and learn to protect yourself, but sometimes it happens that quick that you just...
It's just, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, avoid at all cost is really the end result, because even if you have had a fall in a race, that's the end of your race. You're not going to recover from that, or very unlikely to recover unless it's a Stephen Bradbury type event. Yeah. Yeah.
And was that part of your, to round out the water skiing questions, was that part of your motivation to moving to Mildura? Is that, did that feature largely,
I mean, aside from water skiing being a sport for me, I've always grown up around the water, and water activities have been a huge part of my life. So definitely, I always wanted to move to the river to sort of set up more of a long-term home. But I like the country living too. So I grew up in Kyneton, which is not near any water sources so much. But yeah, the pace of Melbourne, although I had great opportunities in terms of my career, it's definitely not me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well played. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk now about sports science. I think you've got a very interesting perspective in there's the science, and then there's the Pilates, and then there's the physio, all sort of coming together for you.
Yeah.
At the moment, there's a bit of a dumbing down of how we talk about. It feels like we discovered a lot of important stuff about the core, and now we're busy undiscovering it. I'm really curious about the Pilates side of it, because Pilates in the right hands can be brilliant, and in the wrong hands it can be a bit of a waste of time. Not really harmful, just if it's not done properly. How has your Pilates journey fitted in with your sports science and your physio?
So when I first started Pilates, I actually fell into it after I had that accident. So I was trying to rehabilitate to get myself to a level to be able to get back into a gym. Now, gyms probably, when I went back to the gym, it wasn't to the caliber of a strength and conditioning gym like a facility like yourself, so potentially in better hands. Maybe I would have been better managed. But I just suffered greatly as soon as I tried to get back into the gym. I had lots of vestibular issues and still struggle with my concussion now, as it is.
Really?
I'm 8 years on now. Yeah. So anytime I sort of, I guess, push my body to its sort of capacity, start to sort of let a few of the fundamentals drop away, sleep, overworking, over-exercising, whatever it may be, nutrition drops to the side, I start to get symptoms again. And so I know that I need to back off.
What are your symptoms? What happens to you?
So I have lots of trouble with my eyesight. So that's normally the first one, eyesight and headaches.
Yep.
And then I get the nauseousness that goes with it. But I often find and I don't know if it's a compensation strategy in terms of I'm okay when I'm working, I can get through a work day, but then outside of that, I'm very irritable. I just know that I'm not really myself. I have trouble with say if I was to, and so I travel a lot and I, sitting in boats, there's lots of external perturbations and I just don't cope with them. So yeah, I had a few diagnoses since then. But one was a vestibular disorder in which that I had, so because I was fixed it, we're going back to Halo now, sorry, side note, because I was fixed in there, I overworked through my eyes and my frontal lobe sort of started doing what my cerebellum should have been, those automatic processes. And so I would get to the point where my body would just go, that's it, and pretty much make me feel sick so much that I couldn't do what I wanted to do.
That's fascinating. So it's the negative side of neuroplasticity. Your body did a workaround to rewire you to get through the halo brace situation, but then now you've got that issue. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so I had to do a lot of ocular motor sort of retraining to try and teach my eyes to do certain functions, but then teach my cerebellum to do the rest of it. So even I would I had POT syndrome, so my heart rate would jump incredibly. I got diagnosed with an SVT arrhythmia, which I don't feel like I have that now because I haven't had any other issues, and I only get it when I again push my limits. So I think it's very much related to the concussion or the injury itself, and it's just something that I've learnt to manage now. And then I've met different people along the way that have helped me with the vestibular rehab, and then trying to sort of rewire my system post concussion to try and not have these symptoms creep back in again. So
what are some of the exercises you did to retrain your cerebellum?
So a lot of it was ocular motor stuff. So eye following. So I had trouble always. So my injury was on the left-hand side and I always had trouble processing, taking my eye movements to left. And so I only sort of found this out by chance. So I went to go back into physio study and I couldn't follow lines on a page. So I literally had to, when kids learn to read, I had to put the sheet at the bottom, the sheet at the top, and then
just
follow
a little
with my finger.
kind of slit that you would read through.
Yeah, because I'd get so lost, and I'm not great at it, and I thank God for audiobooks because I really struggle to, and I'm trying to be a bit more consistent again with reading actual text, just so I'm sort of relearning, I guess, rehabbing.
So you did a course, so the Master's Physio course at La Trobe University is a full-on course. Everyone talks at really smart people who are very, very good at studying. You're like, that is a big, nasty course. Like, because they're really trying to level you up. It's quite a condensed approach to really get you up to that level.
Yeah. If I had my time again, I'm not sure I'd put myself in that position. Maybe I'd take a bit longer to do it. But yeah, it was very full on. I've never backed down from a
challenge.
Yeah. So the way they do it is you have like a bridging semester. So you start in the summer semester before like normal uni starts again. And then you just kick off with the third year bachelor or undergrad physio students, and you follow the same sequence that they do to get to the graduation.
A semester, and then you're dropped into you're parachuted into third year.
And I mean, I'm pretty lucky that I had a lot of I did the undergrad exercise science degree, but I picked up a few extra subjects to learn a bit more about anatomy, and then I also had like the strength and conditioning internship and bits and pieces. But honestly, still, I was like pretty much like just wading through. Getting there, it was such a challenge.
That is so full on. I've sidetracked you. We were talking about Pilates and the vestibular. So Pilates was a really helpful bridge to get you back into action. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so how I fell into Pilates was I actually started to use that to sort of bridge my gap to get back into the gym. And then I sort of fell in love with the fact that I could create a stimulus and a similar sort of like the intensity wasn't the same as a training session would be in the gym, but I still felt like I was working hard without having the subsequent consequences of the vestibular issues and the concussion things come back when I overstepped the mark.
So you were able to build capacity below that threshold at which it made you feel crap.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's why I've carried it all the way along, because I guess as a physio, we are seeing people, at the very acute level, and a lot of them are quite low functioning. And so often I struggle to find the most basic, exercises to work well for them in, say, a strength and conditioning setting. But with the Pilates machinery, I can use springs to help, I guess, take away some of their body weight and help them learn, a muscle tissue that's pretty much like a baby's muscle tissue that needs to grow and to learn but can't cope with the volume of their body weight. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I talk repeatedly about this, but my journey was that when I first started, I thought square one was squatting a plate on each side. I was like, square one, squatting 60 kilos. And then a few years later, I'm like, I think it's squatting 40. And then like 10 years later, I think it's, can you activate your glutes? Like, it was a bit of a journey to work out that same sort of idea of what is the genuine start point. And so if that is square one, it's almost like Pilates gives you an even earlier square, isn't it? Like you can really dial it down so you can then dial it up later.
Yeah. And I mean, it still comes with its challenges. Like everybody is different, and, some muscle groups, it takes us a lot to get going, and the consistency is the hardest thing too. And especially in an acute setting, like someone, pain hangs around and they feel like they're getting nowhere, but we as clinicians can see that, some of the outcomes are changing, and just, you like hang in there just that little bit more. You're going to have that light bulb moment where it all just comes together and you go, that's what I was meant to be doing.
It just clicks. And and so Pilates itself was invented by Joseph Pilates, who was just a guy a long time ago. But he was pretty clever. How much has it been adapted and added to by physiotherapy, like the way you do it? Because he wouldn't have understood what transverse abdominis was. There'd be a whole bunch of things that he just would have not been across.
Correct. Yeah. Significant adaptations, I think, from the original method. And I mean, we only in the literature know what it was like, really. But there was a lot of ballistic movements, a lot of dynamic movements. It started as like rehabilitation for World War I, I believe. Don't quote me on that, could be wrong. For people, that have been injured in war. And then it sort of morphed into like a strengthening strategy for elite dancers. And then from there, when it got into the clinical setting, so when sort of, I guess, we sort of to adapt it into our setting, some of the original repertoire from Joseph Pilates is not even in it anymore because it's just too advanced. Or it's one of those, the orthopedic nightmare exercises, kind of like those ones. like a burpee.
A burpee,
Yep. Put it in that class. I think there was a podcast not long ago about that. Yeah, definitely not the triple A's. It's as far from them as possible. But then they've kept those other ones, and we've definitely adapted them. And with that, there's like a lot of progressions, regressions, and then different ways to sort of complete the same exercise depending on the client that you're working with and the specific needs of them.
Okay. And if you had, and this is a bit of a nasty question to throw at you, but if you had to distill, you know, if you had to, if a Martian has just landed on Earth and you're trying to explain what Pilates is and why it's different to the other stuff, you explain that you can deload it more. But in terms of the priorities, what's the philosophical underpinning of it?
The philosophical underpinning does come back to that core strengthening, I think. Yeah, so we start, the core is the basis of the movement, and then from there we branch out from there. And I think, you know, in a strength and conditioning sense, when we talk about energy leaks in a system, like if you have that weak core, how do you transfer any force in any sport or, you know, strength and conditioning sense? So, yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
Starting from the start, no, that answers great. And so we've stolen liberally from Pilates Core Advantage, because what I found was, what I experienced a long time ago was that we had some athletes who were doing clinical Pilates and were seeing us and just got amazing results that were significantly better than the average athlete seeing us. And I was like, okay, we need to pinch some stuff. And so we started doing, you know, pelvic floor, transverse abdominis, multifidus, deep neck flexors. Like we started doing that stuff. But I notice more pushback than ever the last couple of years against that stuff. It feels like people are discrediting it a lot and saying, oh, well, there's no evidence that stuff works. Do you encounter that, and how do you encounter it, and how do you counter it in terms of what do you say in response to that stuff?
Well, I'm very lucky that I wouldn't say I've encountered that much at all in my career thus far until now. But I think the results speak for themselves. So, you know, I've got so many. I was lucky enough to work with Essendon Football Club for a little bit last year, just through my boss that I was working with at the time as well. And I ran their clinical Pilates there. Yeah, cool. And so we had a lot of just, you know, persistent lower back pain, nothing crazy, nothing that was keeping them out of the game, but just things that didn't feel quite right. And then so it impacts the way that they train and they lift, as well as their actual sport itself. And so what I found, and this is like, you know, my own little study itself, but just not having much awareness of, you know, TA, multifidus, being able to engage and maintain it through then a more functional movement, we started to see some good results and some good change. But then when I come back to this, like, you know, clinical level, just, you know, our day-to-day person that comes through, again, not much awareness of what it is or how to activate their core. A lot of people like to just like take a big breath in and hold it and they're got it on. And I'm like, oh, not quite. Let's try that again. But then when you start to see the results, so when you start to see that pain is significantly reduced, you know, they're maintaining more of a neutral lumbar spine or, you know, lumbopelvic positioning. They can now activate their glutes better because they had a stable base to start the glute activation from. Like, those are the big things where I'm like, well, clearly it's got to have, whether or not the research is caught up or whether or not, you know, maybe we haven't researched enough, there's got to be merit when we start to see clinical change.
It's so nice to hear, like, to hear you just so comfortably and truthfully just saying maybe the research hasn't caught up. Because it seems that for some people it doesn't occur to them that the research hasn't always caught up. Like, sometimes practice can be ahead of what science has got because science just hasn't found it yet. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
I mean, what do we say to a patient that's in pain? Like, sorry, we're just going to have to wait for the research to catch up before we try something different because this isn't working. You got to do something.
It's just crazy. And so how do you currently, if I said, okay, we need to have a daily routine, you've got 2 minutes a day to do the biggest rock of deep core stuff. How are you currently cueing that TVA? How would you teach that? I know there's going to be different approaches for different people, but if you had, I put a gun to your head and I said, okay, pick the best ways that you're going to teach this stuff without much time. You can have, maybe you've got 4 minutes. I'll be generous. How are you cueing it to people, and how are you thinking about what should fire first? Because for a long time it was, has to be pelvic floor, then TVA, then multifidus. That's what I was taught by quite a few physio friends of mine, which I've gone with and seems to work well. But then others will say, no, it's going to be TVA, then pelvic floor. Like, how are you thinking of what you want to get happening? And then how are you making that happen?
That's a really
nasty,
really
right?
Good question. You've done well. Yeah. Thank you for this. There's always one juicy one in all of your podcasts, I know.
This might never be the one. There could be more.
No, God help me. It really depends on the individual, because I mean, if you've got someone that lives in lumbar extension, like I generally cue a little bit from like lumbopelvic positioning, even like just the basics of it before I even delve into what muscles we're trying to activate. Sometimes I think if I overcomplicate the sequence, it's mind-boggling and I lose the client completely. So my biggest ones, and it's often the ones that people sort of look at you like, is she for real? But when we talk about bodily functions, so for females, it's like draw the wee towards your belly button. I often find is quite a good one, but I like to be tactile too. So if we're not tactile, we don't have that reference. Okay.
Yep.
And then in a sense, that's still sometimes hit and miss. Some women are just like, oh, I don't know what you're on about. And then you have to get a little bit more detailed in terms of what you're talking about. And then for the males, I think, so I've tried a few different ones, but generally the testy lift is the best one I've found.
Yep.
In nuts terms up. Pretty much nuts up. Yes, there's another one that my partner has at the moment with his little group of friends that comes in and does Pilates, but I definitely can't put that on the podcast.
Are you sure? We'll talk about it later.
Sounds like a plan. Maybe we'll put it in the show notes if it's appropriate.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mean, like you've got to relate it back to them. So I think that's the biggest key. And so I think when I got to anatomical, like although it felt good in my mind, someone that has no anatomical knowledge just looks at you, the eyes glaze over, and they're like, not sure, don't know what you're on about. Yeah, I don't know what you're asking me to do. Or they'll just be like so confused, like I'm doing it, and we're like, well, we're not really seeing it, so we need to try and find another strategy.
It's like when people say they're doing it, and you see their belly push out, and they're like, I'm doing it. And like it's like, oh, I'm pretty sure that's overdoing it.
And then we have that conversation like, are you pushing it out against me, or are we sucking it in? We need to suck it in. But then you start to get the rib and they suck all the air in.
Holding on for dear life. And so look, this questioning is also clearly selfish, because I'm curious to see if we are still on the right track, because, things evolve and sometimes you can get left behind. So step one is, establishing whether they have a good, establishing a neutral spine, like that's still the priority. And then you're going with pelvic floor next, and then are you chasing TVA after that? And
so when I'm sort of cueing pelvic floor, like, I mean, how do we know pelvic floor is engaged without actually getting internal and working out if pelvic floor is engaging, or using like ultrasound or something to actually tell us, yes, we're on, or no, we're not. We don't know that, and I'm not qualified in that area. So if I really feel like someone's struggling so much so, and often it's a lot of our, postpartum women, or, someone that's had any sort of trauma in the area, I'll refer on and get an internal examination completed, because then at least it gives them the understanding of what we're trying to achieve. Two, they can get the feedback. Sometimes people need biofeedback, just the same as any other muscle that we might struggle to activate.
One of the most helpful things I ever did was getting ultrasound. As a friend of mine, Simon Manning, that I would see, he would pop the ultrasound on me, and and I could see, because the problem was that I'd listen to him and I was getting it right, but I felt like I was getting it wrong, and then he would pop it on. I'd be like, no, you're doing it right. Like it was really good to just get a sense.
And again, it's that external feedback to go, oh yeah, I'm doing it right. And so that's why I find the tactile cueing is still really important. And I often have like tactile cue at TA to go, yep, we're on, or no, we're not.
So it's fingers on the hip,
inside
in and down
bones.
on the hip bones, inside just a little bit.
Correct. Okay. And then when we engage, we start to feel that tightening sensation through the front there. And so for some people, I really struggle, like, the suck, what did you say, lift the nuts or drawing the wing in, that doesn't work. And so then I come back to that TA cueing, and I guess it's one of those clinical judgment calls where you go, well, let's hope that we are getting that co-contraction with pelvic floor, and so long as we're maintaining the neutral spine, that's as far as I can sort of get with it. And then if I don't see clinical change, then that's when I'd refer on again to get that internal examination completed.
Nice. And are you chasing multifidus actively as well, or does that just come along for the ride when you're doing the other stuff well?
I feel like I'm probably not, as I don't chase multifidus as much, really. I mean, I probably took it from Core Advantage days where we did do that. But I think I cue a little bit more from just heaviness of the ribs, which I potentially may be bringing in multifidus, but it helps me get more of that neutral spine. So when we've got someone lying down, I really look at the rib flare and try and get them to sort of associate whether their ribs make that direct line with their hip bones.
Right. So rather than being in that sort of flared, scissored way, you just just tuck down.
Draw the ribs down to connect with their hips at the front.
Yeah.
So rib and hip connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So those are big rocks of core. What about shoulders? What are you thinking in terms of, is there a big emphasis on serratus anterior? Is there any one thing that you look at across the population? I see. Actually, no, sorry. Let's circle back a little bit. I've jumped ahead. So what I wanted to ask you was, what about an athlete who's now squatting or trap bar deadlifting 140 kilos? How would you tell them, based on your strength and conditioning and physio and Pilates knowledge, how would you advise them to be engaging their core? What's the strategy you think there that is good?
So everyone that I work with now, we have sort of those deep abdominal activation sort of sequences within a warm-up, very similar to what we used to do at Core Advantage, or probably what you still do now. I'm not so up to it now. Yeah. And
a little shorter now. We've trimmed it down a little because we felt like people were just getting really disengaged by being too long. So we kind of had to pick some of the bigger rock stars and cut a few things out, but still deep system and other bits and pieces in there. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So deep system, I have generally it's just a few heel slides, dead bugs. It might be just that general activation without any movement at all, depending on where the athlete is at. And then from there, we call that core set. Yeah, that same position. And so when I use those words now, so you say, because I think we've talked about, keeping things short, sharp and succinct. That's one thing that I definitely took away from Core Advantage going through that internship, is that as soon as you start 2 or 3 cues and I feel like I've lost them anyway. So if I can go core set, set the, shoulder position, glutes on, let's go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so under the heavier weight, it's still the same thing. It's just lock it in and go. Nothing changes much.
Yeah. Look, I probably wouldn't say I don't have any athletes that I have lifting that heavy anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
But if I haven't really done much in terms of diaphragmatic sort of cues and the a Valsalva or probably a little bit out of my league.
I've sort of moved a little bit more towards a partial Valsalva these days, and then I quite like taking a sip of air. So Valsalva is where you and you lock in. That's what all the powerlifters do. But I like the idea of just a little sip under the heavier weight, just so you've got everything. You've just got a little more intra-abdominal pressure.
Still with the deep abdominal lift.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's mutually exclusive. I do it in my own lifting.
Maybe it's not.
I do it in my own lifting and it feels good, but I'm not lifting anything impressive.
No, me either. Same thing though. I've always struggled with a little bit of lower back niggles here and there, and so with that, I religiously will use my deep abdominal activation over my breathing cues. But I like the sip of air. I might try that.
Okay, cool. Let me know.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So now we can get onto the shoulder. So
yes, let's go. Shoulder.
It's a stupid joint. It's a joker. It's a
terrible
ball and socket.
Congruency. Yeah. What ball and socket?
Yeah. It's a really badly designed joint.
Yes.
And so stabilising it, the obvious things for stabilising it are, we need to work on retraction and depression, and those two elements have probably been overemphasised historically. These days it's more fashionable, relevant to talk about sartorius, serratus anterior, sorry.
Yep.
Doing interviews after lunch, terrible idea.
On a Friday too.
What are you cueing people for enhanced shoulder bulletproofness? What are your thoughts around that?
I feel like we lose a lot of lower trap rhomboid involvement. I feel like we get lots of, and it is our life. I think, we're so prone forward, phones, laptops, everything is forward. So I feel like majority of my clients are stuck in that position. I have had to do, like with a shouldery client, so much work on thoracic spine first, though, because without that, I feel like you're just always at odds with trying to get that really nice, neat, scap set position.
Yeah, I say to people, if your thoracic spine is wrong, nothing else is going to be right. That's what I'm saying.
From head to toe, pretty much. Yeah. And again, we're all just, I feel like we're all sort of we have to do work on thoracic just to stay mobile these days. Here I am sitting all slumped forward in my chair. So I think they're big rocks that I use. I do use a lot of tactile facilitation when I'm trying to get that scap set position.
So that's basically putting people that's literally putting them where you want them to be.
Guiding them to where I want them to do, and going through ranges of motion. So, when you flex, I can reach forward and I get pain, and I'm like, okay, well, let's see what your shoulder does when you do that. And they're already like protracted as hell, and then trying to go overhead, and I'm like, well, it's never going to work, biomechanically, that's just
not going to happen.
All wrong. So I often do a lot of subscap release as well to try and enable that movement again, because I just feel like they're so jammed up at tight that even when they're trying to, and they have a good understanding and they are getting the retraction, but it still feels wrong. I feel like subscap is often one of the ones that just disables your ability to get a good retraction and depression.
Okay. And so subscapular, or the rotator cuff muscle under the scapula. Is it possible is there any self work you can do on subscap, or is it 100% you need someone else to be getting their fingers in there?
I've created a few ways.
Have you? Okay, cool.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, there's probably someone else out there that's definitely thought of it before me, but I had so many clients with so many good effects from a subscap release, but then, we might start to push out appointments and then they start to fall back just from work, being at the desk, and then going straight to training and probably not doing the same warm-up sequence that we would like them to do, and then they wonder why it hurts again. So aside from our thoracic release, broomstick.
Okay.
So broomstick, like just literally any broomstick, corner of the room, put a towel over it just to save yourself a little bit of, pain. Armpit out in front, and then sort of fine into that subscap, and you sort of I get them to lunge into it, and then you can really find the same sort of trigger points that I complete when I do the release. Yes.
Okay, cool. That's a hot tip. All right.
Hot tip. It's not nice. The trigger point ball release is too it's a concave surface, so it just null and void.
What about trigger like the guns?
I've never been game enough. The skin tissue is very sensitive there. I don't know how. I mean, it might work. Otherwise, if you sort of get your arm across, you can stick your own thumbs in there, but again, you've got to have pretty good grip strength. And I mean, I would hope to think that mine's not too bad since it's part of my job.
Yours would be outstanding. Yeah.
But it's not the same. I think the broomstick one has been my favourite one, but you do have to sort of give good education with it too, because you don't want them to be hanging in there for a long period of time. And if they are starting to get sort of neurally pins and needles numbness, that's a definite get out of there, move on.
Get out of there. Yeah. Okay. I knew you'd have great answers and thoughts, and you're not disappointed. That's terrific.
Oh, thanks, Durham.
That's awesome.
Too kind.
So that's a great little insight into the Pilates and into some of your tricks, which is brilliant. I'm really curious about where you think the whole physio industry is going, because there seems to be a fascinating convergence at the moment where a lot of physios are less and less likely to want to manipulate and mobilise people, and more and more exercise is the only proven thing, so we're just going to exercise the hell out of it, which I think pushes them into a convergence with intelligent S&C providers. Except the difference is that we are arguably better at prescribing exercise because it's our one thing.
I 100% give you that.
Where do you think it's going? Chiros are very good at sticking to, I'm going to manip and mobilise things. And there's some physios that barely get hands on at all anymore. Do you think that's just going to continue, and we're going to have this sort of dual practitioner thing? More people like you, but who are doing less hands on?
I mean, potentially. I wouldn't say that I still do a lot of hands-on, but I just like the idea of following a client through from the acute phase where they're very much sort of passive clients that rely on me to help relieve pain or relieve dysfunction, and then following through to when they're in that sort of active therapy role where they are actually making the change and empowering them to know that, hey, yeah, I've got this pain, or yeah, I've got this injury. And if it is one of those long-term conditions that isn't going to change, I can control this. I don't need to rely on you know, XYZ practitioner as soon as I run into trouble again. Because the reality is, you know, you do something different on the weekend, or, you know, volumes change, or, you know, for everyone at the moment trying to get back into sport, community sport, where we haven't had, you know, if we haven't had amazing S&C coaches telling us what's going to happen if we don't keep up with our, loading and volume, and then we go from 0 to 100 again, it just doesn't work. The body won't cope. So I think knowing that you've got...
Good time to be a physio, though. All physios are going to be very busy the next 18 months.
It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah. I cringe still, like, you know, I've got clients coming in, they're like, yeah, no, haven't, we've been doing like a little bit of basketball here and there. And now, you know, we've got like 7 trainings a week and this and that. We've got tournament coming up, and I'm like, I've only just met them. I haven't managed any volume. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. We need more education in this world.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
That's probably a good launching point to talk about your business journey, because you've done the terrifying thing of launching your own show. Tell us all about that. About Fortitude Health Company. I think you've done a brilliant thing of locating in regional, because you can really dominate a space pretty well, I reckon. Tell us all about that. What's it been like, and what's the vision behind it?
So Fortitude actually came from a little bit of my own experiences, but then also just knowing the rehab journey, you know. Fortitude actually means strength through adversity. So I felt like, you know, a lot of my own rehabilitation journey, there was a lot of like, I had lots of potentially, not misdiagnoses, but dead ends in terms of treatment. So I sort of, in the acute care setting, at the hospital, I sort of made it through, got the halo off. I appear to be fine, but I don't feel fine. And sort of got to the point where they're like, you know, this is the way life's going to be. You just need to deal with it. And that was massive. So I was 21 and I couldn't read. And I was like, what am I going to do at 21 when I can't read? I've just finished a degree. I can't, you know, maybe I would have got away with, you know, being an S&C coach, but then you can't.
Are you saying S&C coaches are illiterate?
No, do you know what I mean? Like, you know, you can't do it. Like, even to communicate with people, like, we do note taking, we do, like, how would I, and like, so I mean, wasn't to the point that I couldn't read, but I was like a dinosaur trying to like read minds. You know, working on computers was not even a thing then. So the blue light of computers would just send me into like a migraine straight away.
So
and that'd be
during all this time, that was the same time you were knocking it out of the park at Core Advantage.
Yeah.
So you're actually...
Kept that one on the download, didn't I?
Didn't you? Because you're actually even better than I realised. Like, that's... Yeah, because if you were doing that under those circumstances, that's impressive. There you go. Okay, cool.
But, you know, you learn... That's my own... Like, I didn't know any... You know what I mean? Like... Yeah. You deal with what you get dealt. So I just had to do life the best that I could, but it just meant that other things would... So... You know, I found that my social life probably wasn't as great, or, you know, I wasn't as involved with, you know, friends socially for the fact that I could just go to work, and I was ruined after it. And then relax, reset, do the study that I had to do when I jumped into physio, and then, you know, go to work, go home. That was it again. So I didn't do a lot of outside stuff.
I remember at one point you were finishing at Core and you were eating your dinner off your lap driving home. Like, you were that time poor that dinner had to be had whilst driving. Yeah.
That's a credit to you, because that's how much I knew that I need to go to Core to do my internship. And to work for you. I knew that it was going to give me so much in my career. And it does, because, like, I've taken so much of the knowledge that I learned from you, and I still apply it here now.
That's awesome.
And it's one of those things. So jumping into business has been scary. Like, let's
talk about that.
I still don't think that I know enough to do what I'm doing. But I'm slowly learning that even if I don't know enough, I need to recognize that I don't know enough, and then find out who knows it, and then either allow the client to move on to there, or be able to facilitate it for them. But it's just scary. And so one of my biggest fears moving here and setting up the clinic here, like, I knew this is where I wanted to be and where I wanted to set my life up. So there wouldn't be a point in me setting the business up in Melbourne where I was originally. But I was going to move here and potentially, like, don't get me wrong, there's great clinicians here in town. I don't know a lot of them, but I was encouraged by one of my girlfriends and my ski partner, Chelsea Blight. She's a financial planner. She told me that, why would you do that when financially you could set yourself up? Because I think up until that point, I had a pretty terrible financial status in terms of I was just all about like career development. It doesn't matter what it costs. I just want to get there. And so it was probably that time in my life where I'm like, wow, I'm getting up there in age. Maybe I should start to think about setting myself up a little bit better. And it was like, do I buy a house or do I start business? And that was sort of where I was at. But yeah, the scariest thing here and sort of being a sole practitioner at the moment is like, who do you sort of like thrash around ideas with? Like, how do I know that I'm not going to get be a stale old clinician here in 10 years time? Like, I don't want to do that and I don't want to be that.
It's so interesting because I can't imagine, because I wrongly get given significantly too much credit for core advantage, and I'm always at pains to explain to people, no, I've got an incredible team around me who are much better than I am. Like, and you know, I'll come up with like 20 ideas a week, and 16 of them are stupid. You know, like I've just got people around me like, nah, probably not Durham. Yeah, doing it by yourself, that's tough. Take me through the structure. So it's a clinic, you know, some places are a gym with a clinic attached and some places are a clinic with a gym attached or a clinic with Pilates attached. How do you conceptualize what you're building at the moment?
It's a health space. Everything is, you know, equally as important as each other.
Yeah, okay. And is it membership based or is it's appointment based in terms of primarily?
Appointment based at the moment. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have enough time in the day at the moment to, I think, create enough benefit to have a membership base. Like at the moment, I'm getting too far booked out to what, like, you know what I mean? It's just not, I feel like I'm not serving the clients well enough, knowing how far in advance I'm sort of booked out, which is what I really want to change. And that's one of my biggest goals at the moment, is to try and facilitate more appointment times, which will mean trying to train up some more individuals to be working in the same space with similar
That's a great problem to have, that you're going off so quick that you're flat chat.
Yeah. No, I'm very, very lucky to be in the position I am. And it's, like you said, though, I have an amazing team behind me. It wasn't just me that set this up. Like, I mean, from my boss, Nick Kane at Complete Balance Physio, he also works at Essendon. He was the one that I sort of said to him, like, I can't do Melbourne anymore. I can't do COVID anymore. I'm going to move away to Mildura. And I think I'm going to set up my own clinic there. And he was like, how can I help you? What can I do to support you to get you to that point? And like, that was the biggest, like, I guess, push that I got given, other than my girlfriend that was like, financially you need to do this anyway. But sort of knowing that someone in the same field with, you know, so much more credibility in terms of what he's doing within the industry, to go that, you'll be fine. Like, you know, you can do it, off you go. I was like, wow, maybe I can do it. And then supportive, you know, partner, family as well. Otherwise I wouldn't be here at all. No way. I would have just crawled back into my shell and gone, I don't know enough, and I'll just work for someone else again.
Oh, good on you. And it's always fun to share nightmare stories about fit outs. You've got a beautiful space, and I've seen the before photo, because there was that, I did a thing, and I was like, whoa. It looks, what was that like? What was the place like? And did you have, what were your dramas like?
Lots of dramas. So this building was actually built in 1931, and had I have thought about that later, I would probably not have chose this building again, although I love the space now. But a building that old generally doesn't have anything square or level. So that was my first issue. My floor is still a little bit wonky in some positions in the clinic, so you just, you know, aside from that, it wasn't, that's pretty good. Like, you know, most of it worked well, and the space is very open, so I didn't really run into too much issues with that. I did, however, have one little oversight in my treatment rooms, and I feel like I'm going to admit this now, and all of my clients will know. But so in the treatment rooms, there is like a mezzanine floor above it. The mezzanine floor is like not usable in terms of serviceable. It's just like a little short, you know, space to store things. But when a client is in there, and especially a tall client, I can't do any shoulder assessments in standing unless I bring them out into the main space, because they touch the roof. Yeah.
So you got your ceiling's a little bit low.
Ceiling's a little bit low. Yeah.
If that's
and
it,
I was like, wow, didn't think about that.
I reckon you've done well. We made so many mistakes in the first version of Core Advantage. Like we had the business completely upside down in terms of how we had it running.
Yeah.
So
I think if someone can actually come to me and say they nailed it first go, I still don't think I'd believe them. Like, I feel like there is always going to be something to go, I probably could have done that differently. But, or even when you start to see people working in the space, I'm like, oh, that doesn't work. Like, you know, that squat rack is way too close to that cable machine. We need a bit of space between those two. Or, you know, you just can't. I even like, you know, and I tried to think about that stuff, and I tried to have, you know, that, you know, the extra wiggle room that you need, but still I sort of was like, probably not ideal, but that's okay.
You always need more space than you think you'll need. Everything, like on the plan, or you're like, oh, there's plenty of room, and you get it in, you're like, nope, this is too jammed up. Like, we just need more. We need more meters.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you forget too, like, especially in the clinical Pilates space, like, I forgot. Yes, I've got clients on the machines, and, you know, and they're so versatile. So you could be like, you know, the client could be working next to the machine, on the machine, to the other side of the machine. So you need a fair bit of space, especially if they're like, I've got two reformers that sit next to each other, but you need ample space in between. And then I was like, I forgot about me. I've got to fit in there too and work around in there. And I was like, yeah. So I thought I'd have amazing, you know, amounts of space in there. I was going to set up another little space, you know, that could just be like a foam. And I was like, I don't have that much space in here. Yeah. But I think it's really
pretty low drama. That doesn't sound too bad at all.
No, I mean, and I was very lucky again. So I didn't really run the build at all. I was in Melbourne still working, and I had beautiful family friends of ours that we'd met since we've moved to Mildura. They're an older couple. They pretty much took the build on. They were here. They, you know, let trades in and out. They did the painting for me. They did a lot of like the, you know, just little fiddly jobs that you've got to do. Like they did so much for me. I had angels. Yeah. Then my dad, so did you know that original picture?
Yeah.
So my dad bought his truck and Bobcat here. He drove it through the front door and he removed all of that rubbish with the Bobcat. Yeah.
That's great.
Otherwise, that probably would have taken me like 3 weeks on its own.
Yeah, that would have been demolition takes ages. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
But no, nothing too crazy.
That's great.
I think.
And so plans for the future. So you're very busy. You've got to take on people. So if you want to work for someone brilliant and you're in the Mildura area, or if you want a bit of a tree change, and you're smart, hit Maddie up. I couldn't recommend. I've not worked for Maddie, but I'm pretty confident she'd be a phenomenal boss.
Yes.
And so
Thank
plans
you.
to no worries. Plans for that side of it, and what else have you got? Or is that that's your whole thing at the moment?
So at the moment, like my same thing, I have 1,000,001 ideas nearly every day, and I just think, you need to. And then, so my brother's just started work similar to your setup. So my brother's just started working for me as well.
Yeah, cool.
And when I talk to him about my ideas, he's like, you need to be realistic. You know, the bank probably won't give you that much money to start something like that. Like, you know, he's got the real
the voice of reason.
Head on.
My brother does too. Yeah.
But I mean, the gap here is incredible in terms of, especially, I think we spoke about this yesterday, the athletic development gap here is huge. And I think I would love to set up a sole strength and conditioning space, you know, that may or may not be attached to this business or the adolescent sort of development, because there isn't much here and there's so many talented kids here. And I think, you know, when we think about, sort of like the progressions of sport, and, you know, if you don't get those fundamentals down when they're young, no wonder they get to the elite level, you know, if they get drafted or whatever it may be, and then they never make it because they end up running into injury or they just can't keep up with the load.
Yeah,
so ideally that's one avenue that I'd like to go down, but I also love my Pilates avenue. And I used to teach, it's called Legree. It's like on megaformers, so they're the really big reformers. Have you seen them before?
Yeah.
I would love to bring that to Mildura too, more so for my own benefit, because I loved training on them.
Yeah.
But again, it's an American thing. It's a very expensive thing, and so probably not something in the near future, but maybe in a 5-10 year plan.
Yeah, cool.
But then I think I probably have to decide on the two. If my brother was here listening to me, he'd be like, you need to decide one or the other.
Do you know, I read a few months ago, I read an amazing book by Greg McKeown called Essentialism. You will really enjoy the audiobook available also, that he reads himself.
Thank you for taking that into account.
Really, really good. I wish I'd read that at the start of my business journey.
Essentialism. Okay.
Essentialism. Yeah, it's brilliant. So yeah,
probably
awesome.
a good idea.
Yeah, I think really, really good. Maddie, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing all your wisdom. People get around Maddie's business and keep an eye on what she's getting up to. She may not post heaps because I think she's too busy actually doing the work rather than talking about the work. But definitely one to watch. And we look forward to seeing you continue to crush it in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, Durham. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. All right. Cheers.
See ya.
See you guys.
Bye.